Well, one thing to know about Canada's new Prime Minister, and it's so weird to say that because he hasn't been elected by anyone. He doesn't have a seat in the House of Commons. The Liberal selection process was clearly compromised. 2/3 of the voters were disqualified from voting. The results were laughably improbable. I don't know if you saw this, but here's the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, meeting a group of automakers, and the way he introduces himself, I'm Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, because no one can really believe it. Everyone knows it's sort of a fake. He was injected, parachuted, carpetbagged. Here, take a quick look at that. It's so awkward. And look at their faces. They're thinking, who is this guy? Is he like an imposter or a Manchurian candidate or some sort of doppelganger? Take a quick look at this.
Can everyone hear me? Hopefully not. If you're lucky, you can't hear me. If you're unfortunate, you're close, you can hear me. Mark Carney, Prime Minister.
Well, I think the thing to know about Mark Carney is that he actually is very well known in his own circles, which just don't happen to be Canadian circles. He's well known in international circles, in NGO circles, and most importantly, in global warming circles. As you know, he's the co-chair until very recently of GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And net zero, it's sort of been thrown in the wastebasket in America, but boy, is it at work at the UK. They're closing their last steel plant there, which is the definition of net zero. Net zero is exactly what it sounds like. No more emissions, no more carbon. And you really can't make steel without emitting carbon because you can't make steel without burning coal. Let's check in with our favorite expert on the matters of carbon. And I'd love his point of view on Mark Carney and what he is besides a prime minister. No one really believes he's prime minister, but he has a long track record on other matters. I'm talking about Marc Morano, the head of ClimateDepot.com. He joins us now. Mark, great to see you again.
Thank you, Ezra. Happy to be here.
You know, I would not have thought that Mark Carney had a chance to become prime minister other than in this very brief interregnum, because the Conservatives were leading by 20 points until recently. But there's actually a chance that Mark Carney could win. The polls are showing it's pretty much all tied up. Now, I'm still optimistic, but maybe you can give our viewers a little bit of background. Put aside his Canadian political blah, 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 which we're covering pretty well. Tell us about him until last month. Like until last month, he didn't live in Canada. Until last month, he wasn't really a Canadian politician. He was an advisor behind the curtain or something. Who is Mark Carney? What don't Canadians know about him?
Well, I wrote about him in my book, The Great Reset, Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown. The simplest way to explain Mark Carney, there's two ways. One is meet the new boss for Canada, same as the old boss. Mm-hmm. He's Justin Trudeau 2.0, but here's the second and most important. He is a WFE, World Economic Forum, I guess you would say he's not a flunky of them or he's not a puppet of them. He's the guy pulling the strings.
Right.
And that's the difference between Justin Trudeau and him. You've got a very competent globalist, World Economic Forum person now in charge of Canada, whereas he's not going to take marching orders. This is the guy, Mark Carney's been used to giving marching orders. As the former governor of the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada, he was central, along with people like Larry Fink of BlackRock. By the way, great interview with him in Davos this year, even though he didn't talk much. Central in installing environment, social governance, installing the Net Zero Banking Alliance. He has been at the forefront as the mastermind, if you will. Man, again, Mark Carney is the man who pulls the puppet strings. Justin Trudeau was the man who was pulled by the puppet strings. That's the difference of what Canada is getting here.
Tell me a little bit more about GFANZ. It's interesting to me. I didn't know until literally this week that the U.S. Congress has been investigating GFANZ. That's the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. That's Mark Carney's ESG group. They've been investigated. Thomas Massey is part of that investigation for collusion, for a cartel, for anti-market, anti-competitive forces in how they've basically threatened U.S. companies, including coal companies, how they've threatened ExxonMobil, who I thought no one can threaten ExxonMobil. They're the biggest company really in America. Tell me a little bit more about GFANZ. That's a phrase I had never heard in my life until a week ago. What should we know about GFANZ?
The Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Okay, if you go back, when Trump was first elected is when all of this became in earnest. This whole idea, we're not going to get it now internationally because Trump's going to be a roadblock in a large way, and we're also not going to get it in the United States. So we have to do this behind the scenes. And what Thomas Massey's doing is exactly spot on. They absolutely bypass democracy using the banking industry, the equity asset firms, and collusion between whether it's State Street and BlackRock and all the other equity assets and these central bank net zero alliances and the World Economic Forum and the United Nations coordinating. They essentially bypass democracy in every country by forcing behaviors. That was the phrase by Larry Fink, working with Marc Carney, working with all of these initiatives. And the behavior had the whole woke agenda, everything from transgender to critical race theory. But for the purposes of this conversation, most importantly, it was the climate issues. They didn't need Congress to pass a bill. They didn't need a president to do executive orders. They were forcing upon global and national businesses, whether in the US, Canada, their entire net zero ideology. In other words, these companies didn't get funded. Managers didn't get promoted. Managers couldn't even keep their jobs in some places unless they went along with this agenda. So it was a complete collusion, a racketeering enterprise where they were withholding the money to get the behavior they wanted, and they bragged about it openly. And if you look at, Marc Carney's history, his whole point was doing all of this behind the scenes, behind closed doors, working with the bankers. He didn't care what countries wanted, what voters wanted. And I think this is ripe for a massive investigation. It's massive fraud. It's massive collusion. And we have to make sure this kind of thing never happens again.
Thomas Massey's investigation happened last year. The report was issued by Republican congressional staff in December. And I know what I was doing in December. I was A, thinking about the Christmas break, but B, I was riveted by every single day Donald Trump had a new announcement, pronouncement, promise from Mar-a-Lago. So he wasn't president yet, but he was talking about tariffs and he was talking about Ukraine. He was talking about Israel and Gaza. So when the Republicans put out their paper on how GFANZ and several other groups committed anti-competitive acts, breaking the law by threatening energy companies, I missed it. And I think a lot of the world, which would you rather do? Pay attention to Donald Trump's hot tweets or read some report by congressional staff about GFANZ? I still barely know what that is. And even when I say the words, I'm super bored. Like, it's so uninteresting. And I think that's on purpose. Yeah. Is there a chance that'll get any legs? Like, I think there's a chance that Marc Carney will be PM. I'd give that chance 33%. But he was literally deposed by Hill's staff. Like, this wasn't a congressional hearing where the congressmen were out front all making their blowhard speeches and there was a witness there for an hour. Marc Carney was fully deposed. There was a transcript of it. Like, it was a heavy-duty investigation into cartel activities. And the guy who they investigated might be our next prime minister. He's our prime minister right now.
Yeah, well, this is always gets into, first of all, issues of jurisdiction. Can a United States congressional authority really, put anything with teeth on someone like Marc Carney, who's essentially a globalist? His loyalty isn't to Canada. His loyalty is to the World Economic Forum and the whole net zero agenda. This is this is literally one of the handful of players around the world. When you talk about the deep state, it is Marc Carney. I'm not that optimistic that he'll face any legal repercussions, but I think the more we get this known, the more, but I think part of it is what you're saying. It's too arcane for the average person to understand. But essentially what they need to understand, you need to use words like cartel, you need to use words like racketeering, because that's what these bankers colluded to do, led by Marc Carney. Again, as I half jokingly say, he doesn't just know where the bodies are buried. He helped bury them. He helped put them in the condition that they were ready to be buried. And I mean that in a philosophical sense, because he went after everywhere that put up resistance to any of this agenda, and that includes, again, transgender ideology, critical race, the climate agenda, they found out ways to bypass it, to collude, and to force this agenda on companies, on energy companies, on companies that they knew wasn't in their best interest, but they had no choice but to go along. And that's where Thomas Massey's investigation really shines. So, it's very difficult, Ezra, as you well know, to bring down these people. It's very difficult to even interview them or hold them even momentarily accountable. So I wouldn't put too much stock in anything immediately coming from the investigation, but the biggest thing is public awareness.